Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was the first hero to discover multiverse collisions. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in the Heights Alliance common room was thick with the familiar, comforting sense of late evening. From the kitchen lingered the ghost of Katsudan, courtesy of Sato's latest culinary experiment. Muted sounds from a historical drama played on the television, where Yayorozu, Jiro, and Hagakure were curled up on the large sofa, providing a soft, murmuring commentary. It was an atmosphere of earned tranquility, the kind that only followed a day of grueling, bone-deep exhaustion. For the students of UA High's Hero Course, Class 1A, tranquility was a currency more valuable than yen. In his room on the second floor, Izuku Midoriya was oblivious to it all. The world outside his meticulously organized space had narrowed to the sphere of light cast by his desk lamp. His body ached in a dozen different places, a testament to the afternoon's combat training against ectoplasm's clones. A particularly nasty bruise was blooming on his left shoulder where he misjudged a clone's lunge, but he catalogued the pain with a detached sort of satisfaction. It was a data point, a lesson learned. Underestimate numerical disadvantages at your peril. Adapt faster. Before him, spread across his desk like a strategist's battle map, were his treasures. Open to a fresh page was Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 13. Its predecessor, Volume 12, was propped open beside it, displaying a furiously scribbled diagram of Mirko's fighting style. On a small tablet, slowed-down footage from today's training session played on a loop. His pen, a simple black gel model, flew across the paper, its scratching the only sound in the room besides his own low, incessant muttering. So Bakugo's new move, the AP shot, autocannon, isn't just a rapid-fire version of the original, he whispered, his eyes flitting between the screen and his notebook. The concussive force of each individual blast is lower, but the sustained barrage creates a zone of continuous pressure. It's not for piercing, it's for suppression. He's rounding out his arsenal. It's not just about overwhelming single targets anymore. He's developing area of denial capabilities. Smart. Very smart. The recoil control must be immense. He's likely rotating his palms in microsecond intervals to distribute the strain, channeling it back into his core. Is he using his legs as a brace differently? Yes, look at the angle of his right foot. His hand was a blur of motion, sketching Bakugo's stance. Arrows indicating force vectors, notes crammed into the margins about potential weaknesses, a brief window of vulnerability during the initial wind-up, and possible team-up applications, pinning a villain for Todoroki to encase in ice. This was his ritual, his meditation. It was how he processed the world. He didn't just see quirks, he saw the physics, the biology, the psychology behind them. He disassembled heroism into its component parts, and rebuilt it on the page, hoping to understand it, and one day, to master it. He paused, flexing his cramped fingers. The numbers on his digital clock read 21:47. He'd been at this for nearly 2 hours. A deep sigh escaped his lips, and he rolled his neck, a series of satisfying cracks echoing in the quiet room. All Might's smiling face beamed down at him from a poster on the wall, a silent, constant encouragement. Izuku pushed his chair back and stood, stretching his arms towards the ceiling. His muscles screamed in a chorus of protest and relief. He walked to his window, pulling back the simple green curtain to gaze out at the sprawling, glittering expanse of Muzurifu. UA's campus was a dark, quiet island in a sea of city lights. The skyline was a familiar comfort, a jagged line of architectural ambition piercing the night sky. He could name every major building, could tell you which hero agency resided in each one. The twin spires of the Korihori building, Endeavor's agency aglow with fiery orange light, the sleek, modernist cube of the Night Eye agency, and the Moritanaka Tower, the third tallest building in the city, a testament to pre-quirk engineering. He let his eyes rest on its familiar silhouette, a beacon of stability. And then it happened. It wasn't a flicker, not like a faulty light bulb. It was more profound, more invasive. For a single, stretched-out second, the Moritanaka Tower ceased to be. In its place, occupying the exact same space in the skyline, stood something impossible. It was a spire, but not of steel and glass. It looked organic, like a colossal shard of bone or chitin, twisted into a grotesque, helical shape. The surface was a sickly, pale white, laced with veins that pulsed with a soft, venomous green bioluminescence. A thick, ethereal fog, the same nauseating green, what from its peak, drifting lazily downwards before dissipating into the normal night air. There was an impression of immense, ancient wrongness about it, a structure that did not belong in any city built by human hands. Izuku's breath hitched. His heart gave a painful, violent lurch against his ribs. He blinked, his eyes stinging, and it was gone. The Moritanaka Tower was back, solid and reassuringly normal, its familiar red aviation lights blinking in steady rhythm. The night was unchanged. The city was unchanged. He stood frozen for a full 30 seconds, his hand gripping the windowsill so tightly his knuckles were white. He stared, unblinking, at the spot, waiting for the phenomenon to repeat. Nothing. The skyline remained stubbornly, defiantly normal. What? He breathed, his voice hoarse. His mind, his beautiful, analytical, overactive mind, scrambled for an explanation. Fatigue was the first and most logical conclusion. He'd pushed himself to his physical and mental limits today. A microsleep, a waking dream, a simple hallucination brought on by exhaustion and the strain of using one for all. It was the most plausible answer. He let go of the sill and stumbled back to his desk, sinking into his chair. He rubbed his eyes, the heels of his palms pressing hard against his sockets. A hallucination. It had to be, but it had felt so real. The details were seared into his brain, the texture of the chitinous surface, the specific shade of green, the way the fog moved. His hallucinations, rare as they were usually fuzzy, dreamlike things. This had been sharp. Horribly, terrifyingly sharp. He quickly grabbed his tablet, his fingers flying across the screen. He pulled up local news feeds, Hero Network alert channels, even public social media sites, searching for keywords: Moritanaka Tower, strange light, skyline anomaly, villain attack. Nothing. Not a single post. Not a single report. The city was continuing its evening blissfully unaware that one of its most prominent landmarks had, for a moment, been replaced by a Lovecraftian nightmare. If it was a villain's quirk, it was an incredibly subtle one. An illusion that only affected a single person? Possible, but what was the point? A psychological attack? Maybe. But he was just a student. Why target him? And with such a bizarre, specific vision? He shook his head, forcing a deep breath into his lungs. It was nothing, he said aloud, trying to convince himself. You're tired, Izuku. Go to bed. He closed his notebook, tidied his desk with practiced efficiency, and prepared for sleep. But as he lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, the image of the twisted, glowing spire was burned onto the back of his eyelids. It was a glitch in the world's code, a crack in the mirror of reality. And though he tried to dismiss it, a tiny, cold seed of wrongness had been planted in the fertile ground of his analytical mind. It would not be long before it began to sprout. The seed sprouted 3 days later. Life at UA had a relentless rhythm, and Izuku was swept up in it. Foundational heroics with all might, intense rescue simulations in the unforeseen simulation joint, punishing literature assignments from Cementos. There was little time to dwell on a single, momentary hallucination. He'd almost succeeded in burying the memory, filing it away under exhaustion-induced phenomena. He, Uraraka, and Ida were taking a weekend stroll through one of the public parks near the UA campus. The conversation was light, a welcome respite from the pressures of their chosen path. I'm telling you, Ida-kun, if you just add a little more paprika to the marinade, it completely changes the flavor profile, Uraraka said, gesturing enthusiastically with her hands. A fascinating suggestion, Uraraka-kun, Ida responded, chopping the air with a rigid hand. However, the recipe passed down through the Ida family for generations specifically calls for a balance of salt and pepper. To introduce paprika would be to disrupt a culinary tradition spanning decades. Izuku smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile. These moments were precious. The easy camaraderie, the mundane arguments about spices. It was a slice of the normal life he'd always craved, now interwoven with the extraordinary one he was living. He listened, interjecting occasionally, content to just be with his friends. His gaze drifted around the park. Families were having picnics, children were laughing on the swings, a group of teenagers was failing spectacularly to get a frisbee to fly straight. It was a perfect, peaceful afternoon. He glanced towards a row of park benches lining the path ahead, and then he saw it. One of the benches, a standard-issue green-painted wood and iron construction, was different. It was the third one from the end. While the others were mundane, this one seemed to hum with a soft, internal light. He stopped walking, his smile fading. Uraraka and Ida continued for a few steps before realizing he wasn't with them. "Deku-kun?" Uraraka asked, turning back. "Is something wrong?" Izuku didn't answer. He took a few slow steps towards the bench, his eyes wide. It wasn't painted green. It was made of a smooth, pale wood that looked like a fusion of birch and mother-of-pearl. The grains swirled in intricate, mesmerizing patterns, and a soft, white light pulsed gently from within, as if the wood itself were alive and breathing. It was beautiful, alien, and utterly out of place. "Midoriya-kun, you have ceased ambulating. Are you feeling unwell?" Ida called, his concern making his voice even more formal than usual. "The bench," Izuku whispered, reaching out a hesitant hand. "Look at the bench." He gently placed his fingertips on the surface. It was warm, a pleasant, organic heat that felt nothing like sun-warmed wood. It felt like touching the flank of a living creature. The patterns shifted subtly under his gaze, flowing like currents in a slow-moving river. Uraraka and Ida walked back and stood beside him, following his gaze. They looked at the bench. Then they looked at each other, confused. "It's a bench, Deku-kun," Uraraka said slowly, her brow furrowed in concern. "Did you recognize it from somewhere?" "No, don't you see it?" Izuku insisted, his voice rising with a frantic edge. "The wood, it's glowing. And the patterns, they're moving. Touch it, it's warm." Ida, ever the pragmatist, stepped forward and placed his hand firmly on the bench. He held it there for a moment, his expression serious. He then rapped his knuckles on it. The sound was a dull, ordinary thud of knuckles on wood. "Midoriya-kun," Ida said, straightening up and adjusting his glasses. "The bench appears to be of standard municipal design and construction. Its surface temperature is consistent with ambient air temperature. It is, by all accounts, a perfectly normal bench." Izuku stared at him, then at Uraraka, whose face was now etched with genuine worry. He looked back at the bench. The light was gone. The swirling patterns had resolved into simple, painted-over wood grain. The warmth under his fingertips had vanished, replaced by the cool, rough texture of splintery paint. It was just a bench. An old, slightly worn park bench. A cold dread trickled down his spine. They hadn't seen it. They had stood right next to him, looked at the exact same object, and seen nothing out of the ordinary. "Oh," Izuku said, pulling his hand back as if burned. He forced a shaky laugh. "Wow. I must be more tired than I thought. My eyes must be playing tricks on me. Sorry to worry you. Perhaps you are overexerting yourself in your evening training, Midoriya-kun," Ida stated, already shifting into lecture mode. "Adequate rest is as crucial to a hero's performance as physical conditioning. I recommend a minimum of 8 hours of sleep per night." "Yeah, don't push yourself too hard, Deku-kun," Uraraka added, her voice soft with sympathy. "We're all worried about you." He nodded, forcing another smile that felt brittle and thin. "You're right. I'll take it easy tonight." But as they walked away, he glanced back over his shoulder. The bench sat there, innocuous and mundane. Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling. This wasn't fatigue. The spire was one thing, a fleeting image in the distance. This was tangible. He had touched it. He had felt it. The isolation was a chilling, unfamiliar sensation. He was used to sharing his burdens, his analyses, his fears with his friends. But how could he share this? They already thought he was losing his mind. The seed of wrongness now had a root, and it was hooking deep into his soul. The glitches, as he started to call them in his head, began to accumulate. They were small, fleeting, and always personal. No one else ever seemed to notice. A week after the incident with the bench, he was on a solo run through a quieter, residential part of the city. He was trying to clear his head, but his mind was a maelstrom of theories and self-doubt. Was this a new, hidden aspect of One for All? A side effect of the vestiges inside him? Was he developing a second quirk? Or was he genuinely unwell? He paused at a crosswalk, waiting for the signal. He glanced at the stop sign on the opposite corner. It was a standard red octagon, the familiar white characters for Tom are displayed clearly. He blinked, and for 2 seconds, the text changed. The Japanese characters vanished, replaced by a script that was breathtakingly alien. It was angular and sharp, almost like cuneiform, but the symbols were connected by delicate, glowing white filaments. It looked less like a language and more like an intricate astronomical chart or a circuit diagram. It pulsed with the same faint, internal light as the park bench, a cold white against the deep red of the sign. This time, he was ready. His fingers fumbled for the smartphone in his pocket. He had to get a picture. He had to get proof. His thumb swiped frantically at the screen, unlocking it, opening the camera app. He raised it, trying to frame the shot. It was gone. The familiar, mundane was back in its place. No, no, no! He hissed through his teeth, his frustration boiling over. He stared at the sign, willing it to change again, but it remained stubbornly normal. He had missed it by a fraction of a second. He stood there for a full minute, ignoring the crosswalk's signal changing and the confused looks from a passing salaryman. He hadn't imagined it. The image was too clear, too complex. He could still see the sharp, geometric shapes in his mind's eye. When he finally got back to his dorm room, he didn't even bother to shower. He went straight to his desk, but instead of grabbing his hero analysis notebook, he reached into his bottom drawer and pulled out a fresh, empty one. It was identical to the others, a simple campus store notebook, but it felt different. Heavier. He opened it to the first page. The clean, white paper seemed to mock him. For a long moment, he just stared at it. To write this down was to give it form, to admit that it was real. To keep it locked in his head was to admit he might be crazy. He chose reality. His pen hovered over the page. Then, in his neat, slightly frantic script, he wrote the title. Analysis of Unexplained Phenomena, Volume 1. He paused, then added a subtitle in smaller letters. Personal Observations Hypotheses. He began to write. He documented everything, his analytical mind finally unburdened, pouring out the details he had forced himself to suppress. Entry 001, The Spire. Date of the first incident. Time, approximate. 2147. Location, view of Musutafu skyline from UA Heights Alliance 2F. Observation, Moritanaka Tower was momentarily replaced by a structure of unknown origin. Duration, approximate. 1 to 2 seconds. Appearance, organic, helical spire. Pale, chitinous material, pulsing green bioluminescent veins. Emitted a green, fog-like substance from its apex. No sound detected. No other witnesses. Initial hypothesis, fatigue-induced hallucination. Confidence low. Entry 002, The Bench. Date of the second incident. Time, approximate. 1430. Location, Musutafu Municipal Park, Sector Gamma. Observation, a standard park bench, third from east end of main path, appeared to be composed of a different material. Appearance pale, pearlescent wood. Moving, swirling grain patterns, emitted a soft, internal white light. Surface was warm to the touch. Duration, approximate. 45 to 60 seconds. Phenomenon ceased upon observation by others. Uraraka, O, Ida, T. Witnesses saw only a normal bench. Note, this is the first instance of tactile interaction. The warmth was distinct. The object felt alive. Entry 003, The Script. Today's date. Time, approximate. 1815. Location, intersection of Chua and Higashi streets. Observation, text on a standard stop sign was replaced with an unknown script. Appearance, angular, cuneiform-like symbols connected by glowing white filaments. Pulsing light consistent with entry 002. Duration, approximate. 2 to 3 seconds. Attempted to capture photographic evidence but failed. He leaned back, his hand aching. Seeing it all laid out, written in his own hand, was both terrifying and validating. It was a pattern. A strange, nonsensical pattern, but a pattern nonetheless. The pale, glowing materials. The fleeting durations. The lack of witnesses. He flipped to a new page and wrote, General Hypotheses. 1. Targeted illusion quirk. A villain with a powerful and subtle quirk is targeting me specifically. Motive, unknown. Perhaps to discredit me, induce psychological distress, or test the limits of their power. Plausibility, moderate. The lack of any demand or follow-up makes this less likely. Why so subtle? Why not a more direct attack? 2. Wide area sensory glitch quirk. A villain has activated a quirk that affects a large area, causing random, minor sensory errors. I may be more susceptible to it for some reason. One for all? Heightened senses? Plausibility, low. If it were a wide area quirk, there would be other reports. Even minor glitches would cause accidents, confusion. The silence is deafening. 3. Undiscovered side effect of one for all. The quirk is a singularity, and its interaction with my body is still not fully understood. It contains the vestiges of 8 previous users. Is it possible that I am perceiving echoes? Not of the past, but of something else? Are the vestiges themselves perceiving this and bleeding the sensory data into my consciousness? Plausibility, unknown, requires more data. How could I even test this? He tapped his pen against the page, a frantic rhythm. None of the hypotheses felt right. They were attempts to fit an impossible event into a familiar framework. A world of quirks explained almost anything, but this felt different. It felt like a fundamental rule was being broken, a rule he didn't even know existed. His muttering returned, a low, anxious hum. The light is a consistent factor. The pale material, the transient nature. It's like a projection, but it has physical properties, like the warmth of the bench. A projection with mass and thermal energy? That's not an illusion, that's creation. Is it a reality-warping quirk? But those are incredibly rare, legendary even. And they're messy, they leave ripples, distortions. Aizawa-sensei would be able to detect residual energy. These events, they're clean. They happen, and then they unhappen, leaving nothing behind. He sketched the alien script from memory, his hand moving with surprising confidence. The shapes were burned into his mind. He drew the helical spire, trying to capture its grotesque organic symmetry. He was no longer just a hero in training analyzing other heroes. He was an explorer in an unknown country, mapping a coastline that kept changing. This notebook, hidden under his mattress, became his most guarded secret. It was proof that he wasn't crazy. It was the only thing standing between him and the abyss of self-doubt. And it was a secret that was growing heavier with each passing day. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. The glitches had continued, small and unsettling. The sound of the school bell lasting a fraction of a second too long, echoing with the sound of crystalline chimes. The reflection of his face in a puddle momentarily showing a stranger with tired, older eyes. A pigeon in flight leaving a trail of shimmering, pixel-like afterimages. He documented them all in his secret notebook, which was steadily filling with frantic script and bewildered sketches. His friends had noticed a change in him. He was more distracted, his muttering more frequent and more intense. He would often zone out mid-sentence, his eyes staring into the distance, as if watching a movie only he could see. "You've been really jumpy lately, Deku-kun," Uraraka had said to him that morning at breakfast, her round face full of concern. "Are you sure you're sleeping enough?" He'd given her a reassuring smile that felt like a mask. "Just a lot on my mind. Prepping for exams." It was a lie, and he hated it. The secret was a wall, and it was growing higher, brick by brick, between him and the people he trusted most. The isolation was a constant, low-grade ache in his chest. That night, he couldn't sleep. His mind was a racetrack, with theories and counter-theories crashing into each other. He lay in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, the silence of the dorm pressing in on him. He needed to move. He needed to burn off the restless, anxious energy coiling in his gut. He quietly slipped into his running gear, a dark green tracksuit and his signature red shoes. He scribbled a quick note for Ida, just in case his absence was noticed, saying he'd gone for a late-night run to clear his head. He crept out of the dorms, the night air cool and refreshing against his skin. The campus was silent, bathed in the soft glow of security lights. He started a slow jog, letting his feet find their familiar rhythm on the pavement. He followed a path that skirted the edge of the campus, one he'd run 100 times before. It led through a small wooded area before looping back towards the main grounds. The run helped. The physical exertion began to quiet the noise in his head. The pounding of his feet, the rhythm of his breathing, the cool air in his lungs, it was grounding. He was just a kid on a run. Everything was normal. He took a shortcut he knew well, a narrow, paved alleyway that cut between two of the older, less-used storage buildings. It was dark, shielded from the security lights by the tall structures, the only illumination coming from the moon filtering through the gap above. The walls were brick, covered in ivy. It was a tunnel of quiet shadow. He was halfway through when the sound hit him. It wasn't a glitch this time. It was loud, violent, and sickeningly close. It was a sound like a giant piece of vinyl being ripped in half, a high-frequency tear followed by a gut-rumbling whump of displaced air. Vree-thump. Izuku froze mid-stride, his hero instincts screaming. One for all flooded his limbs in an instant, green lightning crackling silently around him. His head snapped towards the source of the sound, just a few meters ahead. The air in the middle of the alley shimmered, like a heat haze on a summer road, but it was distorting the brick wall behind it, bending the straight lines of the mortar into impossible curves. The shimmering intensified, coalescing into a ragged, vertical seam of fractured light. And then, a person fell through. They didn't walk through or step through. They fell out of the shimmering tier, tumbling onto the hard pavement with a pained grunt, as if they'd been pushed from a moving car. The shimmering seam of light snapped shut behind them with a final, echoing zip, leaving behind only a faint scent of ozone and static. The alley was silent again, save for the newcomer's ragged breathing. Izuku stood frozen, every muscle in his body tensed. His mind, which had been so chaotic moments before, was now a sliver of ice-cold focus. This was not a glitch. This was not a sensory error. This was a person. A solid, flesh-and-blood person who had appeared out of thin air. The person pushed themselves up onto their hands and knees, shaking their head. They were dressed in clothes Izuku couldn't place. Utilitarian, dark gray trousers made of a tough-looking synthetic fabric, a form-fitting black long-sleeved shirt, and scuffed, heavy-duty boots. There were no bright colors, no logos, no hint of modern hero fashion or civilian trends. It was practical, almost military, but from a military he didn't recognize. They looked up, their eyes wide with a terror so profound it was almost animalistic. It was a man, probably in his late 30s, with short-cropped brown hair and a face pale with shock. He looked around the alley, at the brick walls, the ivy, the sliver of moon above, his expression one of pure, unadulterated disbelief. Then his eyes found Izuku. The man's terror shifted, morphing into a new kind of shock mingled with awe. He was staring at the faint green sparks still dancing over Izuku's skin. "You're glowing," the man whispered, his voice raspy and laced with a foreign accent, perhaps American. Izuku took a cautious step forward, his hands raised in a non-threatening gesture. His hero training kicked in, pushing past the sheer impossibility of the situation. "Are you all right? Are you hurt?" The man scrambled backwards, crab walking away from him, his eyes darting between Izuku and the spot where he had appeared. "Stay back! Where is this? What just happened?" "The breach, it wasn't contained. You're at Yui High School," Izuku said, keeping his voice calm and even. "You're safe. I'm a student here. I'm not going to hurt you." The man's frantic gaze swept over Izuku's athletic wear, his toned physique, and the lingering energy of his quirk. "A student? What are you?" His eyes widened further in a sudden, horrifying realization. He pointed a trembling finger at Izuku. "You're one of them. A bioauth. A parahuman." The terms were alien, but the meaning was clear. He was talking about his quirk. This man was from a place where quirks didn't exist. The foundation of Izuku's understanding of the world didn't just crack, it shattered. The spire, the bench, the script, they weren't glitches in his perception. They were glitches in reality itself. They were pieces of other places, other worlds, bleeding through. And this man, He had just fallen through one of the seams. Before Izuku could process the sheer, monumental scale of that revelation, the air behind the man began to tear again. The same sound but this time it was more violent, more desperate. A shimmering, unstable vortex of light opened up, and a powerful suction force pulled at the air in the alley. Loose leaves and dust were whipped into a spiral and consumed by the light. The man cried out as the force tugged at him, pulling him back towards the portal. He dug his fingers into the cracks in the pavement, trying to anchor himself. No! Not back! Not there! Izuku's paralysis broke. Regardless of the physics-defying circumstances, this was a person in danger. He lunged forward, covering the distance in a fraction of a second. He grabbed the man's arm, his grip like a steel vice. The pull from the portal was immense, a physical, tangible force that strained even his enhanced strength. Hold on! Izuku yelled over the shrieking tear in space. The man looked at him, his face a mask of desperation and awe at the strength keeping him from being ripped away. It's unstable. You can't hold it, he shouted. The walls are getting thin, the collisions, they're getting worse. What are you talking about? Izuku grunted, planting his feet and pouring more of one for all into his body, the green lightning flaring brightly in the dark alley. The man's eyes were wild. It's not supposed to happen. Worlds aren't meant to touch. The cascade. The cascade is coming! The vortex pulsed violently. The pull intensified tenfold. The man's grip on the pavement failed, and he was yanked backwards with incredible force. Izuku's own feet slid on the ground as he fought to hold on, but it was too much. The man was ripped from his grasp, his body flying back towards the light. As he vanished into the shimmering maw, his final, terrified shout echoed in the alley. It's coming! The portal imploded with a deafening crack that shook the very foundations of the buildings. And then silence. Absolute, profound silence. Izuku was left standing alone in the alley, his arm outstretched, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He was panting, not from exertion, but from pure shock. The scent of ozone was thick in the air. The ground where the man had been was empty. The brick wall was solid and whole. There was no trace. No scorch marks, no residual energy, nothing. It was clean. Just like all the other times. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, the man's words echoing in his mind. The walls are getting thin. Worlds aren't meant to touch. The cascade is coming. This was not a villain. This was not a quirk. This was something else. Something bigger. Something fundamental and terrifying. He looked at his own hands, at the faint traces of green energy fading from his skin. The power of one for all, the greatest power in his world, felt suddenly, terrifyingly small. He had stumbled upon a secret. Not a villain's plot or a government conspiracy, but a secret of the universe itself. A terrible, world-shattering truth, and he was the only one who knew. Sleep did not come. How could it? Izuku Midoriya lay rigid in his bed, the sheets tangled around his legs from his restless turning. The silence of his room, usually a sanctuary for thought, was now a roaring void filled with the echoes of a single, desperate shout. The cascade is coming. His body was a contradiction. The adrenaline from the encounter had long since burned away, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. Yet his mind was a supernova, exploding with impossible new realities. The man from the alley. The tearing sound. The vortex of shimmering, hungry light. The words he'd used. Bioauth, parahuman. Spoken with the kind of casual horror one might use to describe a monster from a child's nightmare. He was from a world without quirks. The thought was so immense, so paradigm-shattering, that Izuku's brain struggled to build a framework around it. For his entire life, the existence of quirks had been the fundamental, immutable law of humanity, as certain as gravity or the rising of the sun. To learn that a world existed where that law was absent was like being told the sky was not, in fact, blue. He finally threw back his covers, the decision made for him by the frantic thrumming under his skin. He couldn't stay here. He couldn't lie still while the foundations of his world were crumbling. He dressed again in his running gear, his movements stiff and robotic. He needed to go back. He had to be sure. Creeping through the silent common room felt different this time. Before, it had been the stealth of a student breaking a minor rule. Now, it felt like the furtive movement of a man burdened with a terrible secret. The sleeping dormitory was a fragile bubble of normalcy he was afraid to pop. The night air was cold, and he welcomed the sharp sting of it in his lungs. He walked, not ran, his footsteps unnervingly loud on the deserted pavement. He retraced his path, his heart rate climbing with every step that brought him closer to the alley. What if it was still there? What if another tear opened? What if something else came through? He reached the mouth of the alleyway and stopped. It looked exactly as it always had, a narrow canyon of brick and shadow. The moon had shifted, casting the lane in even deeper darkness. The faint, clean scent of ozone was gone, washed away by the night breeze, leaving only the damp, earthy smell of ivy and old stone. He took a deep breath, the kind a diver takes before plunging into unknown depths, and stepped inside. One for all hummed beneath his skin, a low-current readiness that was second nature. His eyes, now accustomed to the dark, scanned every inch of the space. He walked to the spot where the man had fallen, where the portal had raged. He ran his hand over the brick wall. It was cool, rough, and utterly solid. There was no seam, no scar, no trace of the violent energy that had warped reality just an hour ago. He crouched down, his fingers brushing over the cracked asphalt. He was looking for anything. A scrap of fabric. A loose thread. A single, alien fiber. His analytical mind, his greatest asset, was now his only tool in this impossible investigation. He began a systematic search, dividing the area into a mental grid. Scuff marks here, he muttered, his voice a low rasp. His fingertips traced a set of deep scratches in the pavement. Consistent with someone digging their fingers in, trying to resist a pulling force. So he was real. The force was real. He moved along the grid, his eyes inches from the ground. He examined every pebble, every weed pushing up through a crack. He found a discarded candy wrapper, a rusted bottle cap, a desiccated leaf. Mundane, normal, wrong. A wave of dizziness washed over him. The adrenaline was gone, and doubt, cold and insidious, began to seep in. What if it had all been a hallucination, a stress-induced waking nightmare of unprecedented vividness? The spire, the bench, the script, and now this? Perhaps he was truly breaking down. The pressure of being All Might's successor, the constant danger, the weight of one for all, maybe it had finally fractured something in his mind. He sat back on his heels, the cold of the asphalt seeping through his thin trousers. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders slumping. He was so tired. Maybe Ida was right. Maybe he just needed to sleep. His fingers brushed against something on the ground, something small and cool. He almost dismissed it as just another rock, but the texture was wrong. It wasn't rough and porous like asphalt. It was smooth, metallic. He lifted his head, his heart giving a hopeful flutter. His fingers closed around the object. It was a disc, about the size of a 500 yen piece. He pulled out his phone, the sudden glare of the screen making him wince as he turned on the flashlight. He held the object in the beam of light, his breath catching in his throat. It was a coin, but it was unlike any coin he had ever seen. It was made of a heavy, dull gray metal that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, with a faint, oily sheen like bismuth. It was tarnished and worn, the edges smoothed down by time and countless hands. On one side, minted in surprisingly sharp relief, was the profile of a woman. She had a strong jaw, high cheekbones, and her hair was pulled back in a severe, functional knot. She wore what looked like a high-collared uniform, unadorned and stark. There was no crown, no laurel wreath, just an air of grim authority. He didn't recognize her from any history book, any royal lineage, any currency on earth. He flipped it over with a trembling thumb. The other side bore no date, no denomination. Instead, it was etched with a complex, elegant symbol that looked like a stylized constellation or a branching tree, its lines impossibly fine. Around the edge, in a blocky, unfamiliar alphabet, was a string of characters he couldn't begin to decipher. It was a language as alien as the script on the stop sign. Izuku stared at it, a slow, wide grin spreading across his face. It wasn't a grin of happiness, but of pure, vindicated relief. He started to laugh, a quiet, slightly unhinged sound that echoed in the lonely alley. It was real. It was all real. This coin was his proof. A souvenir from another world, dropped from the pocket of a terrified traveler. He closed his fist around it, the foreign metal cool and solid and undeniably real against his palm. He wasn't crazy. His world was. The weight of that knowledge was crushing. But the weight of the coin in his hand was an anchor, keeping him from drifting away into the sea of madness. He had evidence. He had a starting point. The next 2 weeks were a strange, tense tightrope walk. On the surface, Izuku was a model student. He participated in class, aced his quizzes, and pushed himself in training. But beneath the surface, he was a man living a double life. Every spare moment was dedicated to his secret. He spent hours in the UA library's extensive science section, devouring books on theoretical physics, quantum mechanics, and string theory, concepts far beyond his high school curriculum. He read about wormholes, pocket dimensions, and the multiverse hypothesis. Most of it was dense and impenetrable, but he attacked it with the same fervor he applied to hero analysis, scribbling notes, trying to connect the abstract theories to the concrete, terrifying things he had witnessed. The coin never left his person. He kept it in a small, zippered pocket inside his school uniform, a constant, weighty reminder against his ribs. At night, it sat on his desk next to his new notebook, the centerpiece of his investigation. He'd filled pages with detailed sketches of it, theories about the metal's composition, a high-density alloy, possibly tungsten-based, and attempts to decode the symbols on its back. His friends, however, saw only the strain. They saw the dark circles under his eyes, the way his gaze would unfocus in the middle of a conversation, the new, guarded quality that had crept into his demeanor. "Are you sure everything's okay, Midoriya?" Todoroki had asked him, his mismatched eyes holding a rare, direct concern. "You seem further away than usual." Izuku had just managed a nod. "Just thinking. A lot to process." The lie tasted like ash. Every time he looked at his friends, a wall of glass seemed to stand between them. He wanted to tell them, to share the terrifying burden, but how? Where would he even begin? "By the way, our reality is colliding with others and I met a man who fell through a hole in space." They would think he'd finally snapped. They would send him to Recovery Girl for a psychological evaluation, not a strategy meeting. For now, this secret was his alone. The next significant event occurred on a bright, cloudless Saturday. Nizu, believing in the importance of public engagement, had authorized supervised patrols for small groups of 1A students in designated low-crime sectors. It was a chance to practice their skills in a real-world environment, interact with the public, and be seen. Izuku was paired with Uraraka and Ida, his two closest friends, which made his internal conflict all the more acute. They were walking through Kiyoshi Ward Shopping Mall, a sprawling indoor-outdoor complex popular with families. The mood was light. Ida was, as usual, taking his duties with comical seriousness, his head swiveling like a security turret as he scanned for any hint of impropriety. "Remember, our purpose here is to be a reassuring presence," Ida announced, his voice projecting slightly too loudly. "Maintain a vigilant but approachable posture at all times, and no dawdling in front of the merchandise stalls, Uraraka-kun." "I was just looking," Uraraka protested, pulling her gaze away from a window display of cute All Might-themed mochi. "Hero work includes community economic observation." Izuku smiled, the expression feeling more natural than it had in days. It was so normal. So wonderfully, blessedly normal. He let himself relax, just for a moment, letting their familiar banter wash over him. They passed a large, open-air plaza in the center of the mall, designed to look like a park. It had real grass, a few small trees and planters, and a large, ornate fountain at its center. That's when the sound started. It wasn't the violent tearing of the alley. It was a low, dissonant hum, like a cello string being bowed at the wrong frequency. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, vibrating in his bones, in his teeth. Izuku stopped dead. "Do you guys hear that?" Uraraka and Ida paused. "Hear what?" Ida asked, tilting his head. "I detect only the standard ambient noise of a commercial district, approximately 70 decibels. It's a humming sound," Izuku insisted, his eyes scanning the plaza frantically. The hair on his arms was standing on end. One for All was thrumming in response, a low-level alarm system he was only just beginning to understand. And then he saw it. The air above a section of the grassy plaza began to shimmer, just like it had in the alley. But this was bigger. Much bigger. The shimmering intensified, creating a visible distortion, a 20-foot square patch of reality that seemed to be turning to liquid. What is that? Uraraka breathed, her playful mood vanishing, replaced by a hero's sharp focus. Civilians, back away! Ida commanded, his voice cutting through the chatter of the crowd. Shoppers, noticing the commotion and the strange shimmering in the air, began to stop and stare, pulling out their phones. Before their eyes, the patch of green grass and the 2 small cherry trees within the shimmering zone dissolved. They didn't burn or fade, they just de-resolved, like a corrupted image file. For a split second, there was a hole of pure, featureless black, a void in the world. Then, with a sound like a rush of dry, sandy wind, something new filled it in. The green grass was gone, replaced by a patch of desert. The sand was a deep, impossible crimson, and it glittered with millions of tiny crystalline facets, like a field of crushed rubies. Sprouting from the sand were not trees, but jagged, crystalline formations that looked like frozen lightning or malformed cacti made of smoky quartz. Above this bizarre landscape, the air itself had changed. It wasn't the blue sky of their afternoon. It was a roiling, bruised sky of deep purple and sickly yellow, with 2 dim, unfamiliar suns hanging in the strange twilight. A wave of palpable heat rolled out from the phenomenon, dry and alien. The shoppers gasped, stumbling back. A villain attack! Someone shouted, and the nascent curiosity curdled into panic. People began to scream and run. Uraraka-kun, crowd control! Get them to a safe distance! Ida barked, his training taking over. I will establish a perimeter. Midoriya-kun, analysis. What kind of quirk is this? Ida was already moving, using his speed to shepherd panicked civilians away from the scene. Uraraka was calling out in a calm, firm voice, directing people towards the mall exits. But Izuku was frozen, staring at the impossible sight. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't a fleeting image. This was a bleed, a large-scale overwrite. A chunk of another world had been brutally copy-pasted into the middle of their shopping mall. The sheer wrongness of it, the raw violation of physics, was breathtaking. He could see the boundary, the seam where the red desert met the green grass, shimmering and unstable. He saw a child's dropped ice cream cone lying just inside the boundary, melting on the crimson sand under the heat of the twin suns. Ignoring Ida's frantic shouts to stay back, Izuku began to walk towards it. He wasn't being reckless. He was being a scientist. The man in the alley, the coin, the books on quantum physics. It had all been theory. This was a laboratory. This was a chance to get real data. Deku-kun, no! It could be dangerous! Uraraka cried out, her voice tight with fear. He didn't stop. He approached the shimmering line that separated his world from the other. The dry heat intensified, smelling of hot rock and strange, metallic dust. The dissonant hum grew louder, a physical pressure against his eardrums. He reached the edge and stopped, his red shoes inches from the red sand. Slowly, cautiously, he reached out a gloved hand. Midoriya-kun, what are you doing? That is an unquantified threat. Fall back immediately. Ida's voice was a frantic buzz in his ear. His gloved fingertips touched the shimmering barrier. A jolt, like a powerful static shock, shot up his arm. It didn't hurt, but it was profoundly strange. The air at the boundary felt thick, viscous, like pushing his hand through cold gelatin. The fabric of his glove where it passed the seams seemed to waver, its color desaturating as if seen through a faulty camera. He could feel the alien heat on his skin, even through the glove. It was real. It was all so terribly real. He held his hand there for a second, 2 seconds, his mind frantically cataloging the sensations. The hum, the heat, the pressure, the visual distortion. Then, with the sudden, shocking finality of a camera shutter, it ended. Snap! The world corrected itself. The red desert, the crystalline cacti, the bruised purple sky, the twin suns, they all vanished in an instant. The 20-foot square of grass and the 2 small cherry trees were back, exactly as they had been. The dissonant hum was gone. The alien heat vanished, replaced by the normal, mild afternoon air. If it weren't for the scorch mark, they might have thought they'd imagined it. In the center of the restored patch of grass was a large, blackened circle. The grass was charred and smoking, and the 2 cherry trees had been flash-burned, their leaves gone, their branches blackened and skeletal. The plaza was silent for a moment, the panicked civilians now huddled at a distance, staring. Then Ida and Uraraka were at his side. "Are you all right?" Uraraka asked, grabbing his arm, her eyes wide with terror and relief. "You touched it! What were you thinking?" "I am unharmed," Izuku said, his voice strangely calm. He was looking at the scorched earth, his mind racing. It had left a trace. Physical, measurable evidence. "That must be an incredibly powerful and unstable warp quirk," Ida stated, pushing his glasses up his nose, his composure returning as he tried to fit the event into a known category. "Or perhaps a reality warping quirk, though those are exceedingly rare. The user must be nearby. We need to alert the pro-heroes immediately." He pulled out his phone to make the call. While he and Uraraka were distracted, their backs turned to him as they scanned the remaining crowd for a potential suspect. Izuku knelt down. His movements were quick and furtive. He pretended to inspect the scorched ground, but his other hand, hidden from their view, scooped a small handful of the blackened soil and ash into a sterile evidence baggie he'd started carrying in a hidden pocket of his utility belt. It was a move worthy of a seasoned detective, born of a desperate need for proof. He stood up, tucking the sample away, just as Ida finished his call. "A report has been filed. Eraserhead and several other pros are en route. They've ordered us to maintain the perimeter and not to engage." Izuku nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "Good call, Ida-kun." On the walk back to Yui later that day, after giving their statements to a grim-faced Aizawa, the atmosphere was thick with tension. "I still cannot believe you approached it, Midoriya-kun," Ida said, his tone a mixture of admonishment and lingering fear. "It was an unnecessary risk. I had to see," Izuku replied simply. "It was just so weird," Uraraka murmured, hugging her arms. "Like something from a nightmare. To just appear and disappear like that. That villain's quirk is terrifying." A villain's quirk. They were so sure. It was the only explanation that made sense in their world. And Izuku, with the alien coin pressing against his ribs and the bag of scorched earth hidden in his belt, said nothing. He just nodded, letting them believe it. Every nod, every moment of silent agreement, felt like a betrayal. He could feel the glass wall between them thickening, becoming a fortress of solitude he was building around himself. He was protecting them from a truth he wasn't sure they could handle, but the cost was his own connection to them. The burden of knowledge was a lonely, heavy mantle. That night, Izuku's dorm room became his laboratory. The door was locked. The curtains were drawn. His desk lamp cast a pool of intense, focused light on his workspace, turning the rest of the room into a realm of shadow. He sat hunched over his desk, the secret notebook open to a new page. He had already written a detailed account of the Kyoshi Ward bleed, complete with sketches of the alien landscape, diagrams of the plaza, and notes on the sensory data he'd collected. Entry 004, the bleed. Sensation at boundary was of increased viscosity, and a low-voltage electrical field. Thermal differential was sharp and immediate. Phenomenon collapse was instantaneous, leaving behind significant thermal residue and material degradation, scorched earth. This confirms the override is not an illusion but a temporary, physically present reality imposition. On one side of the notebook lay the small, clear baggie of blackened soil and ash. On the other lay the tarnished, gray coin. His 2 pieces of tangible evidence. 2 artifacts from the other side. He stared at them, his brow furrowed in thought. The man in the alley had been from a quirkless world. The coin was his. But the desert? The twin suns? The crystalline cacti? That didn't feel like a variation of Earth. That felt truly alien. This wasn't one other world colliding with theirs. It was multiple. The name Misa had once used in a lecture on theoretical quark evolution came to mind. A chimera, a creature made of the parts of many others. His reality was becoming a chimera. Absently, he picked up the baggie of soil and moved it across his desk, setting it down next to the coin. He was just tidying up, his mind a million miles away, speculating on the energy required to displace a section of reality. He turned back to his notebook to write down a new thought. He was stopped by a sound. It was faint, so faint he thought he was imagining it at first. A low, resonant hum. He froze, his pen hovering over the paper. It was the same dissonant frequency he'd heard at the mall, but much, much quieter, like a recording played at the lowest possible volume. He held his breath, straining to locate the source. It was coming from his desk. His eyes darted to the two objects sitting side by side. The coin and the baggie of soil. The hum was emanating from them. He leaned closer, his heart starting to pound. The tarnished gray surface of the coin seemed to shimmer faintly under the lamplight. He watched, mesmerized, as the coin began to vibrate. It started as a barely perceptible tremor, but it quickly grew, rattling softly against the wooden surface of the desk. The hum grew louder in pitch and volume, syncing with the vibration. Then, the soil in the baggie began to react. The fine, black ash particles lifted into the air inside the sealed bag, swirling in a miniature cyclone, drawn into motion by the coin's vibration, and deep within the swirling ash, a tiny spark of light appeared. It was a dull, angry red ember, pulsing in perfect time with the hum of the coin. Pulse. 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 Izuku stared, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and ecstatic discovery. He reached out a trembling hand and slowly pushed the baggie of soil away from the coin. As the distance between them increased, the hum faded, the coin's vibration slowed to a stop, and the ember in the bag winked out, the ash settling back to the bottom. He held his breath for a count of 10. Then, with the deliberate motion of a bomb disposal expert, he slid the baggie back towards the coin. The moment they were within a few inches of each other, the phenomenon started again. The low hum, the rattling vibration, the swirling ash, the pulsing red ember. He had done it. He had created a repeatable experiment. These weren't two isolated incidents. They were connected. The coin from the quirkless world and the soil from the alien desert were resonating with each other. They shared a property, an energy signature, a fundamental wrongness that allowed them to recognize each other across the gulf of their disparate origins. This was his proof. Tangible, repeatable, scientific proof. He wasn't a traumatized student having hallucinations. He was a scientist who had just discovered a new, terrifying law of physics. He sat back in his chair, the enormity of it all washing over him. The excitement of his discovery was quickly dwarfed by the crushing weight of its implications. This was happening. The walls between worlds were thinning, and the collisions were getting worse, just as the man had said. The glitches, the bleeds, the visitors, they were all symptoms of a cosmic sickness, and the man had given that sickness a name, the cascade, a cascade. A chain reaction. One event triggering the next, and the next, growing in scale and intensity until the entire system collapses. He looked at the humming coin and the glowing bag of dust on his desk. This was his proof, yes. But it was also his burden. He couldn't go to the police. He couldn't tell his friends. He couldn't even tell most of his teachers. Who could possibly understand this? Who could he trust with a truth that could shatter society's understanding of reality itself? His eyes drifted up to the smiling poster of All Might on his wall. The symbol of peace, the man who made everyone feel safe, the man who could solve any problem with a punch and a smile. But you can't punch physics. You can't smash a fundamental law of the universe. Izuku's gaze then drifted to his own reflection in the dark window. He looked small, tired, and hopelessly out of his depth. A new kind of fear settled in his heart, colder and deeper than any fear of a villain. It was the fear of the unknown, the fear of a problem so vast it defied comprehension. He had his proof. He was no longer alone in his knowledge. But now, he had to decide what to do with it. And there was only one person he had ever trusted with the impossible. There was only one person who had believed in him when he was just a quirkless, hopeful boy. He picked up the coin, its vibration a frantic pulse against his palm. He carefully sealed the baggie of soil. He grabbed his new, secret notebook. He had to tell All Might. He had to. The coin was a cold, hard fact in Izuku's pocket. The baggie of scorched earth, now triple sealed and hidden beneath a false bottom in his desk drawer, was his corroborating evidence. He was no longer just a boy who saw things. He was the sole researcher in a field of study that didn't yet have a name, cataloging the death throes of his reality. This new knowledge was a constant, low-frequency hum beneath the surface of his daily life. It changed everything. Conversations with his friends became exercises in evasion. He'd find himself staring at them, at the vibrant, solid reality of their faces, and a cold dread would wash over him. How fragile was it all? If a patch of park could be replaced by an alien desert, what was stopping the floor of the classroom from becoming a bottomless chasm? What was stopping the air in their lungs from being momentarily replaced by chlorine gas from some toxic world? The glitches were increasing in frequency, and more worryingly, in nature. They were no longer just fleeting, passive observations. They were becoming kinetic. The most terrifying example came during a routine training exercise. The scenario was simple, a simulated villain attack on a public transit bus. Cementos had created a section of city street, complete with dummy civilian cars and a full-sized replica of a municipal bus. Izuku, posted on a nearby rooftop as Overwatch, was tasked with coordinating his team on the ground. He was tracking the villains, played with gusto by a few upperclassmen, when he felt it. The telltale thrumming in his bones, the faint, dissonant hum that was becoming his own personal doomsday clock. His eyes snapped away from the bus, scanning the street. There. A blue sedan, one of the dummy cars parked at the curb, was shimmering. Not now! He hissed under his breath, his knuckles white where he gripped the rooftop ledge. On the street below, the exercise was unfolding. Bakugo was blasting his way toward the bus's engine block, while Kirishima and Sato were preparing to rip the doors off. They were oblivious. No one else could see it. The shimmer around the blue sedan intensified. But instead of being replaced by something else, the car began to lose its solidity. It became translucent, a ghostly, shimmering blue outline of a car, and inside it, a real family, a mother, a father, and a child in a car seat, all UE staff volunteers playing the role of civilians in peril, were also fading, their faces frozen in silent, ghostly screams. They weren't part of the simulation. They had been waiting for their cue to evacuate a different building. Izuku's blood ran cold. This was new. Phasing. If that car fully resolidified while it was overlapping with the curb it was parked on, or worse, if it drifted a few feet and resolidified inside another car, the results would be catastrophic. Matter could not occupy the same space. The resulting explosion would be devastating. He didn't have time to think. He didn't have time to explain. Todoroki, ice wall on the east side of the bus, now! Box them in! He yelled into his comms, his voice sharp and commanding. He needed to clear the immediate area around the phasing car without revealing why. Midoriya? My position is on the west flank. Todoroki's calm voice replied, laced with confusion. That's not part of the plan. Do it! Izuku roared, already moving. He activated One for All, the green lightning enveloping him as he leaped from the rooftop. Below, he saw Todoroki, ever trusting despite his confusion, stomp his foot, sending a massive wall of ice erupting from the pavement, effectively shielding the area around the sedan from the main exercise. Izuku landed silently on the street behind the ghostly car. He could see the family inside, their forms flickering violently. He had seconds, maybe less. He couldn't punch this problem. He couldn't smash it. He needed a delicate touch. Black whip, dark, sinewy tendrils of energy erupted from his arms. He sent 3 of them forward, not as bludgeons, but as impossibly fast, precise lassos. The tips of the tendrils phased through the translucent car door, as if it were smoke. One wrapped gently but firmly around the father's waist, another around the mother's, and a third, smaller and more delicate, coiled around the solid base of the child's car seat. He pulled. It was the strangest sensation he'd ever felt with the quirk. There was resistance, but it was slick and frictionless, like trying to pull something out of thick oil. He gritted his teeth, pouring more power not into strength, but into control, pulling them smoothly through the phased car door and out onto the solid asphalt behind him. Just as the blue sedan snapped back into full, solid reality with a loud thump. It was perfect. Untouched. The family, now solid and real, collapsed onto the pavement, gasping, their eyes wide with a confusion that would soon turn to terror. They had just experienced something impossible, a few seconds of non-existence. What the hell was that, Deku? Bakugo's angry shout came over the comms, the exercise now in chaos. What's going on over there? Aizawa's voice, cold and sharp, cut through the noise. All teams stand down. Exercise terminated. Midoriya, my office. Now, later, sitting opposite his homeroom teacher, Izuku faced a new kind of challenge. Aizawa's tired eyes were narrowed, analytical, missing nothing. Explain yourself, Midoriya, Aizawa said, his voice flat. You deviated from the plan, issued unauthorized commands, and used your quirk in a manner that could have endangered civilians. Your hunch resulted in a successful rescue, but it also looked like a massive overreaction to a driver who simply forgot to put their car in park. Their vehicle rolled forward 6 inches, Midoriya. 6 inches? Your response was to leap off a building and physically extract them from their car. Why? Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. The truth was on the tip of his tongue, a wild, screaming thing. The car was turning into a ghost. We were all in danger. Reality is broken, but he looked at Aizawa's face, a face that understood logic, tactics, and the tangible world of quirks. He couldn't do it. Not without proof. Not without a plan. I saw the driver slump over the wheel, sir. Izuku lied, the words tasting like poison, and the child in the back. I thought it might be a medical emergency, like carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty exhaust. I believed waiting to confirm would have been too late if I was right. I made a judgment call. It was reckless. I apologize. It was a plausible lie, well constructed, playing on a hero's duty to act. Aizawa stared at him for a long, silent moment, his gaze seeming to pierce right through the fabrication. Izuku felt his palms sweat. Your instincts have always been abnormally sharp, Aizawa finally said, leaning back in his chair. But so has your tendency to throw yourself into danger. This time it worked. A time will come when it won't. You're on probation from Overwatch duties for the next 2 weeks. You'll be on the ground, where I can see you. Dismissed. Izuku bowed, relief and shame warring within him. Yes, sir. As he walked out, he knew he dodged a bullet. But he also knew Aizawa didn't fully believe him. He bought himself time, but he'd also placed himself under a microscope. And the incidents were getting worse. The danger was escalating from existential dread to immediate, physical threat. He was running out of time. That evening, unable to focus on homework, unable to face his friends, he went for a run. It was becoming his only escape, the only time his mind could find a semblance of peace. The rhythmic pounding of his feet a steady beat against the chaotic symphony of his thoughts. He chose a different route tonight, a longer, more isolated path that wound through the forested hills at the very edge of UA's massive campus. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and pine. The moon was a bright, silver disk in the clear sky, illuminating the path ahead. He pushed himself, running faster, harder, trying to outrun the voice in his head that whispered of cascades and thinning walls. He was deep in the woods, miles from the dorms, when the world went wrong again. It started with the sound. The violent, high-frequency rip of tearing vinyl, followed by the deep whump of displaced air. Vree-thump. Izuku skidded to a halt, his red shoes digging into the dirt path. Green lightning flared to life around him instinctively. He knew that sound. He would never forget that sound. He spun around, his eyes scanning the dense woods. 10 meters to his left, between 2 ancient-looking cypress trees, the air was wounded. A ragged, vertical seam of fractured light, about 7 feet tall, pulsed with an unstable, sickly energy. It wasn't a shimmering patch like the desert bleed. This was a door. A brutal, jagged hole punched through the fabric of his world, and just as before, something fell out of it. It was a man, and he landed hard, tumbling onto the mossy ground with a grunt of pain and surprise. The portal, the wound in the world, did not close. It remained open, a shimmering, chaotic tear in the fabric of the forest night, casting strange, shifting patterns of light on the surrounding trees. Izuku stood his ground, every muscle tensed. One for all sang under his skin, ready? This visitor was different from the last one, where the man in the alley had been wearing simple, functional clothing. This man was clad head to toe in a sleek, dark gray tactical suit. It wasn't bulky armor, but a form-fitting composite material that seemed to ripple like sharkskin when he moved. A helmet covered his face, its opaque, black visor giving him an insectoid, inhuman appearance. In his hands he held a rifle, but it was unlike any firearm Izuku had ever seen. It was compact and angular, with no visible magazine or ejection port. Coils of a coppery metal wrapped around the barrel, and a crystalline structure glowed with a soft blue light near the stock. The man pushed himself to his feet, his movements economical and trained. He swept his rifle in a short, professional arc, assessing his new surroundings. The forest, the moon, the dirt path. Then the rifle's aim stopped, centering directly on Izuku's chest. "Identify yourself, anomaly!" The man's voice crackled, filtered through a speaker in the helmet. It was sharp, cold, and devoid of any discernible emotion. Anomaly. The same concept as the last visitor's parahuman. A name for what he was. "I'm not a threat," Izuku said, raising his hands slowly, palms open. "My name is Izuku Midoriya. I'm a student at the school this forest belongs to." "School?" the filtered voice replied, a note of disbelief creeping in. "My readings indicated a significant chronoton flux event. A reality breach." "Not a school." The man's head tilted, his helmeted gaze fixed on the green sparks dancing around Izuku. "Your energy signature is off the charts. Uncoded potential, class 7 or higher. You are the source of the disturbance." Before Izuku could respond, a new sound intruded, the snapping of twigs and a low, guttural snarl from the woods behind him. Izuku's head whipped around. A low-level villain, a man with a minor gigantification quirk and a history of petty theft and assault, was crashing through the underbrush. He must have been using the woods as a hideout. He was large, about 8 feet tall, with mottled green skin and a brutish, angry face. He had likely heard the sound of the portal opening and come to investigate. His eyes, small and greedy, were fixed on the visitor's strange rifle. Well, the villain growled, a wide, ugly grin spreading across his face. "Look what we have here. Some kind of fancy new hero and his toy. Hand over the gun, shiny man. And your wallet." The man in the tactical suit didn't even flinch. He remained utterly still, his rifle trained on Izuku, dismissing the approaching villain as a non-threat. The villain's grin faltered, replaced by a flash of rage at being ignored. "Hey! I'm talking to you!" He broke into a lumbering charge, his heavy footsteps shaking the ground. This was it. A nexus of the impossible. A hero in training, a traveler from another reality, and a common criminal, all colliding in a moonlit forest next to a gaping hole in space-time. Izuku's mind processed the variables in a microsecond. Threat 1, the villain. Immediate, physical, predictable. Threat 2, the visitor. Unknown capabilities, advanced technology, potentially hostile. Innocent? The visitor is a person. He appears to be a soldier or an officer of some kind, not a monster. My primary duty is to save lives. He is out of his element, and in potential danger. Objective, neutralize the villain. Protect the visitor. De-escalate the situation. Gather information. Time seemed to slow down. The villain raised a massive, club-like fist, aiming to crush the visitor. The visitor, still focused on Izuku as the primary anomaly, finally began to turn his rifle towards the new, larger threat, his movements calm and efficient. He wasn't fast enough. Izuku was. "Get down!" he yelled. He exploded into motion. In the space of a single heartbeat, he performed 3 distinct actions. First, he dropped his power output to a controlled 8% and shot forward, not at the villain, but past him. The air cracked with his passage. Second, as he passed the visitor, he sent out a single, whip-fast tendril of black whip. It coiled around the visitor's chest and yanked him bodily off his feet, pulling him a good 20 yards away from the villain's path, depositing him roughly but safely near the shimmering portal. Third, having cleared the line of fire, Izuku pivoted on his heel, his momentum carrying him into a powerful spinning kick. His foot, glowing with the emerald fire of One for All, connected squarely with the side of the charging villain's head. Smash! The impact was like a thunderclap. The villain's eyes rolled back in his head, his forward charge arrested completely. He went down like a felled tree, his massive body crashing to the forest floor with a ground-shaking thud, unconscious before he even hit the dirt. The entire sequence, from Izuku's shout to the villain's collapse, took less than 2 seconds. Silence returned to the forest, broken only by the hum of the portal and Izuku's own steady breathing. He stood over the unconscious form of the villain, the green lightning of One for All slowly subsiding, leaving him bathed in the pale moonlight. He turned to face the visitor. The man in the gray suit had already recovered, rising to his feet from where Black Whip had deposited him. His rifle was raised again, but he wasn't aiming it. He was holding it in a low-ready position, his posture radiating a mixture of shock and professional caution. He had watched the entire event unfold. He had seen a teenager move faster than a bullet, manifest black, solid energy tentacles, and fell a 300-kilogram opponent with a single kick. Slowly, the visitor reached up and unsealed his helmet. There was a hiss of depressurization, and he lifted it off. The face beneath was that of a man in his 40s, with sharp, intelligent features, tired blue eyes, and close-cropped gray hair. His expression was one of profound, world-altering astonishment. He stared at Izuku, not as a threat, but as a violation of every law of physics he had ever known. By the Founders! The man breathed, his unfiltered voice quiet and resonant. He took in the glowing remnants of Izuku's power, the unconscious giant on the ground, the fading tendrils of Black Whip dissipating into nothing. You're one of them. His awe was palpable, but it was laced with a deep, ingrained terror. It was the look of a man who had spent his life fighting ghosts, only to finally meet one that could punch back. My designation is Field Operator Kaido Vance, Interworld Chronoton Security, the man said, his voice regaining a sliver of its professionalism, though his eyes remained wide. My unit is tasked with containing reality breaches from the null zone. I was tracking a cascade signature when I was pulled through. Izuku's blood ran cold at the word. Cascade? The same word the man in the alley had used. What is the cascade? Izuku asked, taking a hesitant step forward. I've heard that term before. Vance's eyes narrowed. You've encountered other crossers? How? The breaches should be sterile. He looked from Izuku to the unconscious villain. What is this place? What are you? Your biological energy output is impossible. The manifestation of solid, mutable matter from your limbs. It defies every law of thermodynamics. It's my quirk, Izuku said, the word feeling strange and inadequate. My power. In this world, about 80% of the population is born with some kind of special ability. The last traces of composure on Vance's face crumbled, replaced by stark horror. 80%? He whispered the words like a blasphemy. An entire world of anomalies? A whole civilization of uncoded potentials? That's not a breach. That's a plague. The portal behind Vance began to pulse violently. The humming intensified, the light flickering like a dying fluorescent bulb. A powerful suction force began to pull at the leaves on the forest floor, at the fabric of their clothes. The aperture is destabilizing, Vance shouted over the rising shriek of the portal. It's trying to correct itself. He was being pulled backwards, his boots skidding in the dirt as he fought against the invisible tide. Izuku saw the panic in his eyes, the same panic he'd seen in the eyes of the man from the alley. Grab my hand! Izuku yelled, lunging forward. No! Vance roared back, a strange mix of terror and duty in his voice. He raised his rifle, not at Izuku, but at the portal itself. My duty is to contain breaches, not to cross them. I can't stay here. My presence, my technology. It could contaminate your reality sequence. You'll be torn apart. Izuku screamed, fighting his way towards him. The pull was immense now, a gale-force wind sucking everything into the shrieking vortex of light. Vance was losing his footing, sliding faster and faster towards the tear. He reached out, not for help, but to grab Izuku's arm, his grip surprisingly strong. His face was inches from Izuku's, his blue eyes wild and intense. Listen to me. If you have others, if you have seen the signs, the flickers, the overlaps, You have to understand, the walls between realities are failing. Think of them like dams. Our worlds are reservoirs. But the concrete is cracking. And your world, a world full of so much raw, uncoded energy, you're not a reservoir, you're a fault line. He was being yanked back with incredible force, his words coming in frantic shouts. The cascade isn't an invasion. It's not a war. It's a sickness. A chain reaction. One breach triggers another, weakening the walls further, causing more breaches. It's an exponential collapse of space-time, and your world, with its impossible energies, is accelerating it. You're the epicenter. He was at the edge of the portal now, his body half submerged in the chaotic light. He held onto Izuku's arm, his final warning a desperate, chilling prophecy. They're not supposed to cross. The walls are getting thin. The cascade is coming. And it's starting with you. With a final, sickening whoosh, Vance was ripped from Izuku's grasp and consumed by the light. His rifle, torn from his hands at the last second, clattered to the ground at Izuku's feet. The portal imploded with a thunderous crack, plunging the forest back into moonlight and silence. Izuku stood there, panting, his arm outstretched, the phantom sensation of Vance's desperate grip still tingling on his skin. His mind was a maelstrom, battered by the waves of revelation, a plague of realities. You're the epicenter. He looked down. At his feet, lying on the moss and dirt, was the visitor's strange, alien rifle. More proof. More weight. He stumbled backwards, his legs suddenly weak, and collapsed against a tree. He slid down its trunk to sit on the damp ground, his head in his hands. The unconscious villain, the silent forest, the impossible weapon, it was all too much. The secret was no longer a weight. It was a mountain. And it was crushing him. The glitches, the bleeds, the visitors, it was all connected. It was all spiraling towards a single, terrifying conclusion he could no longer deny or ignore. The end of everything. And he, somehow, was at the center of it all. He couldn't do this alone. The thought was no longer a worry, it was a certainty. He couldn't fight a cosmic sickness by himself. He couldn't punch a chain reaction. He needed help. He needed resources. He needed strategy. He needed someone who could see the entire chessboard, not just the single square he was standing on. But more than anything, he needed someone to believe him. Slowly, shakily, he got to his feet. He looked at the unconscious villain, then at the rifle. He couldn't leave them here. With a grunt of effort, he slung the heavy villain over his shoulders in a fireman's carry. With his free hand, he picked up the alien rifle. It was heavy, made of strange, cool materials. It felt like holding the future, or the end of it. His journey back to the dorms was a long, slow march of dawning resolution. Every step was a commitment. Every labored breath solidified his decision. He delivered the villain to the campus security office with a brief, heavily edited report about a training exercise that went off course. They were too flustered by the sudden appearance of a giant, unconscious criminal to ask too many questions. He hid the rifle in the same secret compartment as the soil sample, another piece for his impossible collection. Then, he went to his room and gathered his evidence. He took out the secret notebook, its pages now filled with the frantic scrawl of a man discovering the end of the world. He took out the tarnished gray coin, its very existence a paradox. He held the two items in his hands, the paper and the metal. His case file. His confession. There was only one person he had ever trusted with the secret of One for All. Only one person who had looked at a quirkless, crying boy and seen the heart of a hero. The symbol of peace. His mentor. His hero. Tashinori Yagi. All Might. Izuku's face was a mask of grim determination. The time for secrets was over. The time for solitude was over. He couldn't carry this mountain by himself any longer. He needed to share the burden, or it would break him. He walked out of his room, down the silent corridors of Heights Alliance, and out into the night. He didn't head towards the teacher's lounge or the main school building. He knew where All Might lived, in a small, unassuming faculty apartment on the quiet side of campus. He reached the door, its simple, numbered plaque seeming impossibly mundane for the man who lived behind it. For a long moment, he just stood there, the cool night air washing over him. This was it. The point of no return. Once he knocked on this door, nothing would ever be the same again. He would either be believed and find an ally, or be dismissed as insane and be truly, utterly alone. He took a deep, shuddering breath, steeling his resolve. He thought of the twisted spire, the red desert, the terrified faces of the visitors, the chilling prophecy of the cascade. He raised his hand, his knuckles brushing against the cool wood of the door. He knocked. The walk across the UA campus was the longest 10 minutes of Izuku Midoriya's life. The night was still and deceptively peaceful, the moon casting long, skeletal shadows from the manicured trees that lined the pathways. Every rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze sounded like the tearing fabric of reality. Every flicker of a distant security light was a potential glitch, a tear in the veil. He clutched the notebook and the coin to his chest, the two objects feeling impossibly heavy, like anchors pulling him down into a sea of madness. He was walking toward the faculty apartments, a quiet, unassuming block of buildings tucked away on the far side of the campus. It was a place he had never had reason to visit before, but he knew the way. He had, in a moment of obsessive analysis months ago, memorized the campus layout down to the last service corridor and maintenance shed. He knew which apartment belonged to All Might's civilian identity, Toshinori Yagi. With every step, his resolve wavered. A frantic, terrified voice in the back of his mind screamed at him to turn back. "What are you doing? You're going to bother him, in the middle of the night, with a story about monsters and magic coins. He'll think you've finally cracked under the pressure of One for All. He'll take it away from you. He'll be so disappointed." The fear was a cold, coiling serpent in his gut. Disappointing All Might was a prospect more terrifying than any villain. All Might had given him everything. He had taken a quirkless, broken boy and told him he could be a hero. To betray that faith, to appear unstable and delusional, felt like a sacrilege. But then, the other voices would rise up. The terrified shout of the first visitor. The grim, prophetic warning of Kaido Vance. "The cascade is coming. You're the epicenter." He clutched the notebook tighter. This was bigger than his fear. It was bigger than his relationship with All Might. If Vance was right, this was about the survival of his world, and possibly countless others. He had a duty. It was the first, most fundamental lesson All Might had ever taught him. When someone is in trouble, you act. And right now, everyone, everywhere, was in trouble. They just didn't know it yet. He found the building, its simple brick facade looking achingly normal. He walked up the quiet, carpeted stairs to the second floor, his footsteps sounding like thunderclaps in the silence. He found the door, apartment 2B. A simple, black number on a small, brass plaque. Nothing about it betrayed the fact that the former symbol of peace, the greatest hero the world had ever known, lived a quiet, humble life behind it. For a full minute he just stood there, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He rehearsed the words in his head for the 100th time. "All Might, sir, I need to talk to you about a matter of utmost urgency concerning potential cross-dimensional incursions." "No, too formal, too clinical. Sir, I haven't been sleeping, I've been seeing things, and I think they're real." No, that sounded like a confession of insanity. He let out a shaky breath, dismissing the prepared speeches. He would just have to tell the truth, plainly and methodically, as he had recorded it in his notebook. He would let the data speak for itself. He was an analyst, after all. This was the most important analysis of his life. He raised a trembling hand, the knuckles pale under the dim hallway light. He took one last, deep breath to steady his nerves. He knocked. The sound was soft, 3 hesitant raps, but in the silence, it felt like a gunshot. He immediately wanted to take it back, to run and hide, but his feet were rooted to the spot. He heard a faint shuffling from within, then the sound of a lock turning. The door opened a few inches, held by a security chain. A sliver of warm, yellow light cut through the gloom of the hallway. One tired blue eye, sunken in a gaunt, skeletal face, peered out at him. "Young Midoriya?" Toshinori Yagi's voice was a hoarse whisper, thick with sleep and concern. "What is it? Is everything all right?" "It's past midnight." Izuku's throat was dry. He swallowed hard. "All Might, sir. I'm so sorry to bother you this late. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't important." His own voice was a strange, shaky thing. Toshinori's expression softened from surprise to deep, paternal worry. He saw the boy's wide, terrified eyes, the way he was clutching a notebook to his chest like a shield. He didn't see a powerful successor. He saw a scared kid who looked like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. The security chain rattled as he slid it free. "Come in, my boy," he said, opening the door wider. "Come in. You look like you've seen a ghost." The phrase hit Izuku with such force that he flinched. He stepped inside, and Toshinori closed the door behind him, the soft click of the lock sealing them in. All Might's apartment was a shock in its sheer simplicity. It was small, neat, and sparsely furnished. A simple sofa, a small dining table with 2 chairs, a modest kitchenette, and a bookshelf filled not with tales of heroic deeds, but with history books and poetry collections. The air smelled of brewed tea and old paper. There were no trophies, no memorabilia from his glory days save for a single, small, framed photo on the wall, a picture of a much younger Toshinori standing with his master, Nana Shimura. It was the home of a man trying to be invisible, a quiet haven for a retired soldier. "Sit, Toshinori urged, gesturing to the small sofa. "Can I get you some tea? Water?" "No, thank you, sir," Izuku mumbled, perching on the very edge of the sofa cushion, his back ramrod straight. He couldn't get comfortable. His entire being was a coiled spring of anxiety. Toshinori didn't press. He sank into the armchair opposite the sofa, a worn, comfortable-looking piece of furniture that seemed to swallow his skeletal frame. A wave of concern washed over him. He had seen this look on the boy's face before, after the Kamino incident, after his fight with Overhaul. It was the look of trauma, of a burden carried alone for too long. "Young Midoriya, what's happened?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. "Is it about one for all? Are you hurt? You can tell me anything, you know that." Izuku took a shaky breath. This was it. "It's bigger than that, sir. Much bigger." He looked down at the notebook in his hands. "I don't know where to start. I think it's better if I just show you. I've been documenting it. It's the only way I could keep track." With trembling hands he held out the notebook. Analysis of Unexplained Phenomena, Volume 1. Toshinori accepted it, his brow furrowed in confusion. He opened it to the first page. His eyes scanned the title, then the first entry. He began to read, his expression shifting from concern to deep puzzlement. He read about the impossible spire, the glowing park bench, the alien script on the stop sign. "My boy," he began, his voice soft. "This is very detailed. You know that overexertion, especially with a quirk like ours, can lead to fatigue, even hallucinations. When I was starting out, I once thought I saw the sky turn plaid after a 36-hour rescue operation." He was trying to offer a gentle, logical explanation, a lifeline to normalcy. "I thought it was that too at first," Izuku said, his voice gaining a sliver of strength as he began to present his case. "That's what I wrote in my initial hypothesis. But then..." He leaned forward, his eyes burning with a desperate intensity. Then came the bleed. At the Kiyoshi Ward Mall. Uraraka-kun and Ida-kun were with me. They saw it too. A piece of the world was overwritten. It was real. It left a scorch mark. I have a soil sample. Toshinori's comforting smile faltered. He remembered Aizawa's report about the incident. A powerful, unstable warp quirk was the official theory. But Izuku's description, a bruised sky of deep purple and sickly yellow, with 2 dim, unfamiliar suns. That wasn't the language of a simple warp. That was the language of something else. He kept reading. Izuku didn't wait. He pressed on, the words tumbling out of him now in a frantic, yet ordered cascade. "But that's not even the worst of it. The glitches, the bleeds, they were just a prelude. People are coming through. Visitors." He recounted the story of the first man, the one who appeared in the alley. He described the clothes, the terror, the way he'd looked at Izuku's quirk and called him a parahuman. He explained how the man had been ripped back into the portal, screaming about the walls getting thin. Toshinori had gone very still, the notebook resting forgotten in his lap. The gaunt, tired man was gone, replaced by the shadow of All Might, the hero who listened to every detail, who understood that the world was more complex and dangerous than most could imagine. And tonight, Izuku's voice dropped to a near whisper. It happened again. A soldier. He called himself Field Operator Kaido Vance. He was from an organization called Interworld Chronoton Security. He was tracking the cascade. He recounted the entire incident in the forest, minute by agonizing minute. The visitor's advanced technology, the fight with the low-level villain, the raw power of one for all juxtaposed against the visitor's scientific disbelief. He repeated Vance's words, his prophecy, verbatim. An entire world of anomalies. You're not a reservoir. You're a fault line. The cascade is coming, and it's starting with you. When he finished, the small apartment was thick with a heavy, ringing silence. Izuku was breathing hard, his chest heaving, the weeks of pent-up fear and isolation finally vented. He had said it all. He had laid his impossible truth at the feet of his idol. He braced himself for the verdict. Taishinori was silent for a long time. He stared into the middle distance, his mind, once the domain of heroic strategy and villainous plots, now grappling with a concept that dwarfed them all. String theory, the multiverse. These were things he'd seen in science fiction movies, not concepts to be discussed as a clear and present danger in his living room. Finally, he looked at Izuku, and the boy was shocked by the expression on his face. There was no skepticism. No disbelief. No pity. Only a profound, soul-deep gravity. You said you had proof, Taishinori said, his voice raspy. The first visitor. Did he leave anything behind? Wordlessly, Izuku reached into the hidden pocket of his jacket. His fingers closed around the cool, heavy disc. He pulled it out, and placed it on the small coffee table between them. The coin. It lay there on the polished wood, absorbing the warm lamplight. It was a stark, gray anomaly in the simple room. Taishinori leaned forward, his skeletal frame creaking. He didn't touch it at first, merely stared at it, his hero's eyes, which had faced down all for one, now gazing upon something truly, fundamentally alien. May I? He asked quietly. Izuku nodded. With a surprisingly steady hand, Taishinori picked up the coin. The moment his fingers touched it, his breath hitched. It was heavy, far heavier than its size would suggest. The metal was cold, with a strange, dense quality he had never felt. He turned it over, his thumb tracing the profile of the severe-looking woman, then the intricate, branching symbol on the reverse. He saw the alien script around the edge. He held in his hand a piece of another world. A piece of the impossible. I can't punch this, he whispered, the words so soft Izuku almost didn't hear them. He looked up, his blue eyes meeting Izuku's green ones, and for the first time, Izuku saw not the invincible symbol of peace, but a tired, mortal man confronting his own powerlessness in the face of a new kind of threat. My entire life, my entire career, Taishinori said, his voice gaining a fragile strength. The answer has always been to be stronger, to hit harder. If a villain was too powerful, I just had to push past my limits, to go plus ultra. I can fight men. I can destroy machines. I can topple monsters. But this, he gestured with the coin. This is physics. This is the fabric of existence itself coming undone. I don't know how to fight that. I can't punch the laws of the universe into submission. He placed the coin carefully back on the table. He leaned back in his chair, a deep, weary sigh escaping his lips. He looked at Izuku, who was watching him with wide, anxious eyes, waiting, and then, All Might smiled. It wasn't his booming, confident grin. It was a small, tired, but deeply genuine smile. He reached across the small space between them and placed a bony hand on Izuku's shoulder. His grip was surprisingly firm, a grounding anchor in the swirling chaos. I believe you, my boy, he said, his voice imbued with a quiet, unshakable certainty. Every word. Izuku's composure finally, completely shattered. A choked sob escaped his lips, and tears he hadn't even realized were welling up began to stream down his face. The weeks of suffocating loneliness, of questioning his own sanity, of carrying a burden that threatened to crush his soul, it all broke apart under the weight of those three simple words. He wasn't alone anymore. Thank you, he gasped, scrubbing at his eyes with his sleeve. I was so scared. I thought I thought I was going crazy. No, Tashinori said, his hand still firm on Izuku's shoulder. You were being a hero. A different kind of hero. You didn't just see a problem, you investigated it. You analyzed it. You gathered data. You used the greatest weapon you have, not one for all, but your mind, young Midoriya. That brilliant, analytical mind of yours. You faced the terrifying unknown and you didn't run. You tried to understand it. I have never been more proud of you than I am in this moment. The praise, so earnest and heartfelt, was a balm on Izuku's frayed soul. He finally managed to get his breathing under control, wiping the last of the tears from his face. Tashinori's smile faded, replaced by a grim pragmatism. But my pride and my belief won't solve this problem. You were right to come to me, but I am not the man who can help you fight this war. This isn't a battle of fists, it's a battle of wits. A battle of logistics, strategy, and science so far advanced it might as well be magic. He looked at the notebook, at the coin, his mind working, the symbol of peace turning his strategic faculties to a problem unlike any he'd ever faced. We need help, Tashinori stated. We need resources. We need secrecy. And we need a mind capable of grasping the sheer, mind-bending scale of what you've uncovered. A mind that will not break, or panic, but will see this as the ultimate problem to be solved. He paused, his gaze becoming distant and sharp. There is only one person at UA who fits that description. Only one person I would trust with a secret of this magnitude. Izuku knew who he meant before he even said the name. There was only one being on campus with an intellect that was itself a world-breaking quirk. Principal Nizu. Izuku breathed. Precisely. Tashinori confirmed, his expression grim. He pushed himself to his feet, a new sense of purpose animating his gaunt frame. This is a problem that requires a mind far greater than ours, young Midoriya. And we are going to give it to him. Right now. The walk to Principal Nizu's office was a world away from Izuku's earlier, lonely trek. Now, he was not alone. The towering, skeletal form of Tashinori Yagi walked beside him, a silent, comforting presence in the dark. The fear was still there, a cold pit in his stomach, but it was no longer isolating. It was a shared burden. They were a team of two, marching off to report the end of the world. The main Yui building was a silent, monolithic giant at this hour. Their footsteps echoed in the vast, empty hallways, past darkened classrooms and silent training facilities. It felt illicit, like they were trespassing in their own home. Tashinori used his faculty keycard to grant them access to the administrative wing, a part of the school Izuku had never seen. They arrived at a heavy, polished oak door with a simple brass plaque that read, Principal. Tashinori knocked, a firm, resonant sound that spoke of purpose. For a moment, there was no answer. Then, a calm, cheerful voice, clear as a bell, came from an intercom speaker next to the door. Tashinori-san? To what do I owe the pleasure at this late hour? And you've brought young Midoriya. How curious. Come in, the door is open. The lock clicked, and the heavy door swung silently inward. They stepped into an office that was both exactly what Izuku expected and nothing like it. It was vast, with a floor-to-ceiling window that offered a breathtaking, panoramic view of the city skyline. The walls were lined with books on every conceivable subject, from quirk law and military history to quantum physics and philosophy. Multiple computer monitors glowed with scrolling lines of code and complex data streams. It was the nerve center of a genius, and in the center of it all, sitting behind a large, immaculate desk, was Principal Nizu. He was perched on a booster seat so he could see over the desk, a tiny, white-furred figure in a perfectly tailored suit. A delicate porcelain cup was steaming gently in his paws. Tea? Nizu offered, his cheerful, beady black eyes twinkling. His smile was a constant, friendly fixture. I'm having a rather delightful first flush Darjeeling. Not tonight, thank you, Nizu, Tashinori said, his voice grave. He gestured for Izuku to step forward. We are here on a matter of the utmost urgency. Young Midoriya has discovered something I believe only you are equipped to handle. Nizu's smile didn't falter, but his eyes sharpened, the cheerful twinkle replaced by a deep, unnerving intelligence. He set his teacup down with a soft click. Indeed? Then please, young Midoriya, you have my complete and undivided attention. His gaze fell upon Izuku, and for the first time, Izuku understood why so many people were terrified of the principal. It felt like being X-rayed, every nervous tick, every half-truth, every fear laid bare before that colossal intellect. Taking a deep breath, with All Might standing like a silent sentinel behind him, Izuku began again. He was more confident this time, his voice steadier. He laid the notebook on the polished surface of Nisa's desk. It began 3 weeks ago, sir, he said, and he walked the principal through it all. He was concise, focusing on the data, the observations, the hard facts he had collected. He presented it not as a terrified student, but as a field agent delivering a report. He spoke of the glitches, the bleed, the visitors, and their chilling, consistent warnings of a cascade. Nisa listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't ask questions. His cheerful demeanor slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to recede. The smile remained, but it became a thin, unreadable line. The playful light in his eyes vanished, leaving behind an intensity that was cold and absolute. His ears, which usually twitched with every sound, were perfectly still. He was absorbing every word, processing, correlating, and calculating at a speed no human could match. When Izuku finished his account of Kaido Vance's prophecy, he slid the final piece of evidence across the desk. The gray, alien coin. It came to a stop directly in front of the principal. Nisa looked down at it. He didn't touch it immediately. He simply observed it, his head tilted. Then, with a delicate, precise movement, he picked it up between two paws. He brought it close to his nose and sniffed it. He tapped it gently against his teacup, listening to the resonant frequency, his ear twitching slightly at the alien pitch. He turned it over and over, his hyper-intelligent brain scanning, analyzing, and deconstructing the object on a molecular level. Finally, he set the coin down next to the notebook. He folded his paws neatly on his desk. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy, and terrifying. Izuku held his breath. Tashinori stood like a statue, his face a grim mask. Nisa looked up, his gaze moving from Tashinori to Izuku. The last vestiges of his cheerful persona were gone, stripped away to reveal the cold, hard supercomputer beneath the fur. His voice, when he finally spoke, was devoid of any warmth, any humor. It was the voice of pure, unadulterated analysis. "Thank you for bringing this to me, Midoriya," he said, his tone flat and chillingly serious. "Your methodical documentation and courage in the face of such a paradigm-shifting phenomenon are commendable. You have done exactly the right thing." He paused, his black eyes seeming to pierce through the veil of their reality, to see the cracks that Izuku had described. "Tashinori," he said, his voice dropping even lower, drawing them in. "Your successor has not discovered a new villain. He has not uncovered a conspiracy or a secret organization." Nisa's gaze settled on Izuku, and the weight of his final pronouncement landed with the force of a physical blow, a sentence that would forever define the next chapter of their lives. "I believe you have discovered a fundamental, existential threat to our reality."